some of us are voluntarily retiring following this meeting, and others of us could be involuntarily retiring after this meeting. So look forward to getting through this one as quickly as possible, and Alan will help us along on that line. So welcome everybody. Are there any apologies? One from Peter Bevan, who's in Japan.
I will move the apologies be received.
Thank you. Seconder?
Happy to second that.
Second. All those in favour? Aye. Are there any notices? No notices. Conflict for interest declarations? There are none, despite what the paper said yesterday. Confirmation of the last minutes, which is the minutes of the September 25th. Some
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Would you have a seconder? We did have some public excluded ones too, but we can't move them, can we? Yeah. There is no move to public excluded. Oh, do we have a mover? Do we have a seconder to pick up the minutes? Rick, thank you. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
We'll do those public excluded ones at the end of this meeting. Okay, decision items.
Before we get on to that, we're not going to have minor matters today.
It appears not. But,
no, it's not on the agenda.
But let's have them. I mean, thank you for picking that up.
I've got two minor matters. Plastic recycling and Kahutia Nursery.
Oh, gee.
Just want to have something interesting to add. You cut me out.
Plastic and what?
Kahutia Nursery. I'll be 30 seconds on both.
Any other minor items? There are none. We'll move to decision item 4, recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee. Tom, are you taking us through this? Tom will speak to it.
Look, I will speak briefly to it. In terms of the recommendations, we have one recommendation on two substantial matters, one of which there's a recommendation, and just noting that for another significant matter there is no recommendation. Just want to, in respect of the terms of reference paper, I think it's been, on reflection, the recommendation that sits before you probably does not need clause 3.3, which goes from, I think that really just, it's coming from the previous recommendation that's before the committee, and kind of speaks to a process that's actually not really a part of the paper. Effectively, some minor amendments to the terms of reference were agreed, and they were documented. There were some matters that were considered to be outstanding that will be the subject of a further conversation down the track. But in the meantime, there was a commitment to put these recommended amendments to the various appointers, of which this committee stands as an appointer as well, and to seek unanimous agreement to those amendments. So I don't think, on reflection, that clause 3.3 and 3.3.3 really, they probably actually confuse the resolution or give it its lack of clarity. So I'll just make that comment. In terms of the notification pathway for tank, I just kind of want to pick up on a comment that Councillor Bailey, or a question that Councillor Bailey put to me in the meeting in terms of the ambiguity or the lack of ambiguity around whether the notification pathway decision was a matter for the RPC, and I think my response to Councillor Bailey is that it is not unambiguous, and I think in terms of whether it's an issue today as to whether Council can take that decision in the absence of a recommendation. If I was asked the same question, I would give the same answer, that it is not unambiguous, and we couldn't say either way as to whether the terms of reference. And I think this comes down to sort of a certain degree, or a significant degree of lack of clarity that sits within both the legislation and the terms of reference, in terms of what happens in the absence of a recommendation. So very difficult for staff to give a direction on what can or cannot be done there.
Mr. Chair, just on that point, can you be clear as to whether you mean ambiguous or not ambiguous? Just be very...
Being ambiguous.
So I think
I'm unclear what not unambiguous means, please.
it's
slow on the
ambiguous.
uptake.
It's ambiguous.
It's ambiguous,
Yep.
thank you.
And so effectively, so where we find ourselves now is, I think, if I was to summarise it, we have three options that fall into two categories. The first category is making of a decision today, in which case a decision could be made. Well, I'm not saying a decision. Theoretically, a decision could be taken to recommend either the streamlined planning process or the Schedule 1 process. Or the second category is no decision today, which is some form of a refer back to the Regional Planning Committee. And so I just thought I'd open with that. Make those opening comments. Staff's recommendation remains that we think on balance the streamlined planning process is the pragmatic way forward. But we're also very conscious of the impact of further delay. And so I'm happy to answer any questions around that.
Okay. Any questions specifically? We just keep to questions at the moment for time on that.
So you haven't written a choice of recommendations in here to do one or the other. Why is that?
Well, I don't think we really have I think it comes back to the ambiguity in the Act. I mean, I think the fact that we don't have a recommendation from the committee stands for itself. I don't think that provides us or gives us a direction that we should then represent those matters for decision here. I think that would be a step too far for staff.
Question, Chair. It would be helpful if there's two issues here arising of the RPC. One is about the terms of reference, the other is about the pathway forward. Can I suggest we deal with those one at a time?
Yes,
and can I suggest we deal with the simpler one firstly, the terms of reference?
Yeah, I mean, such as they are, yeah. You're probably right.
So that would be recommendations 1, 3, 4 and 5.
Excluding 3.3 and 3.3.3?
Correct.
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
I'm happy to second that.
Any speakers on that? Just remember what we're doing, we're separating them. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? So, we're down to the other recommendation on
Recommendation
number 2. Whether we fast track or go slow, and how we go about that. Any questions on that first, and then we'll...
I'm happy to move a motion if you wish to.
I have a question.
Fenton has a question, and Debbie has a question. Just hold your fire. Go Fenton, then Debbie.
So this would be seen as a material decision, in my view. I'd like the CE's view on that. And on the basis of it's the last day of council, we're binding the new council, whoever they may be, into what I suspect is going to be quite a torrid first couple of flurries with the RPC. Have you got a view, C, on the, considering this is a significant decision, are we entitled to make it?
So in terms of the significance of engagement policy, a decision to notify a plan change is not one that we would consider triggers the special consultative procedures under the Local Government Act. Indeed, the Schedule 1 process or any plan change process, whether it be the fast track or otherwise, has its own statutory consultative process associated with it. So on that basis, we certainly don't consider as staff that a decision to notify a plan change would trigger the significance of engagement policy. So that's the first thing to say. Having said that, it clearly is it is a big decision for council to take in relation to a large body of work that's taken place over many years. And with respect to today's timing at the end of the triennium, I guess there's a balance that on the one hand, This council has laboured over the tank plan change over the last 3 years. It put significant additional resourcing into the tank plan change over the last 3 years. And it has spent a lot of time with its regional planning committee, both in workshop and informal deliberation, considering this plan change. So it's been a major project of this council over the last 3 years, and completing it, and this council owning it in so much as being the council that has done the hard yards on this plan change, could be argued as being appropriate. On the other hand, this late in the triennium, if the decisions taken today do give rise to significant relationship issues, particularly with the Regional Planning Committee, doing that at the end of the triennium, throwing that to the next council, may also, or could be ill-advised. I think at this point, as we understand it, the treaty settlement entities represented on the Regional Planning Committee are of the view that if the council was to notify today using the Schedule 1 planning track, that would be consistent with their expectations. Indeed, that's the way the majority of them voted and put their motion forward at the last Regional Planning Committee. And they've also articulated a view, at least informally, that the council is entitled to go down the Schedule 1 track in the absence of a recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee, on the basis that it's the default standard track that any plan goes down, and therefore a decision to go down the fast track would be a departure from the standard planning track. So if the council today was to decide to notify and go down the Schedule 1 track, then I think staff view, having kicked this around a fair bit over the last few weeks, would be that there wouldn't be a major issue with the Regional Planning Committee in the new triennium. So you would be completing the job at the stage of the triennium. You wouldn't be throwing a major problem to the next triennium, except for the fact that you will be embarking on a slow planning track that will run well beyond the government's current package of policy reform. And it will also come with some resourcing implications for council, as we've provided advice to the RPC in the substantive papers previously. So we'd end up in a situation where we potentially are putting an awful lot of time and ratepayer resource in behind a highly litigious process to finally get to the plan being operative, with a consequential set of impacts on the council's wider planning work across the rest of the region. So that, before you, really is the trade-off. And I guess we'd also just note that if there was a view today that the streamlined plan track, which has consistently been staff's preferred option, if that is pursued, that will come with opposition from the treaty settlement entities and potentially other stakeholders. And that may weigh heavily on the mind of the Minister for the Environment in deciding whether or not the streamlined track could be pursued. So weighing all that, you'd have to say there's a better than even chance that the Minister would return the plan back to us to go down the Schedule 1 standard track. I think there's a reasonable possibility, if not probability, given the level of opposition that we have had indicated to us would likely be expressed to him about that course of action. So the path of least resistance essentially is to notify under the Schedule 1 track today. That would be the path of least resistance, but it will come with resourcing implications for council and potentially not see this plan made operative for quite some years.
Just a follow-up. So the Minister has the last call
For notification, this is just how.
on either pathway? Minister has last call on either pathway or just the fast track?
Just fast track.
Not the Schedule 1? Okay.
Correct.
But the advice that's been given, I don't agree with.
James, you indicated that there was some change in legislation that was expected the day after the last RPC meeting.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
The bill's been introduced to the House, as I understand it, and it will need to go through the normal select committee process and develop this full support of Parliament before it becomes enacted, and we're looking at the middle of next year, I think. I don't know whether, Tom, you've got any more intel on that.
So if you started on the Schedule 1, would that change once the bill became operative?
I think, so if I could have through you, Chair, if I could have a crack at answering that. So the package as it stands now, if that was to sort of survive the process, I imagine that when that became, when that was enacted or when that was close to being enacted, I think if we were on the Schedule 1 process, that we'd simply be obliged to come back to you and give you some advice around what the impact of that is on the tank plan change. But given that it would probably require a decision of the Regional Planning Committee. If we were going to change its pathway or modify it significantly, we'd really have to just bring that decision through the various committees and council. I just want to make just one note just in relation to Councillor Wilson's earlier question, just as a point of clarification, is that the tank plan change has been adopted for notification. This is just simply how to notify, not whether to notify.
Just to clarify that, just put that into much more legal view, you would have to withdraw it. The Minister won't interfere with anything that's in process unless we withdraw it. Imagine it would never get withdrawn. So you get on that pathway today, you stay on that pathway. And everybody else will get in front of us.
You would need, again, a decision by the Regional Planning Committee to withdraw the plan once we commence down the Schedule 1 track. And then we get caught in this loop of trying to achieve agreement by that committee, which might be, again, like the last meeting, unable to achieve 80% support either which way. And then, again, Council would be faced with not having a recommendation from the RPC on that matter, and we'd still be on rails with a Schedule 1 track, and then the Council would have to decide whether it would unilaterally do that against the will of the RPC. So all roads continue to lead back to the RPC essentially having potentially a veto over the Council's actions in this area, if that's the view of what the legislation means. But as Mr Skirman outlined at the start, there is some ambiguity as to whether or not the Council can act in the absence of a recommendation from the committee.
I'm just frustrated here, Chair.
Tom's question before Rick.
Yeah, back to the question that Fenton raised about this appearing so late in the triennium. A question to the Chief Executive. The tank process began in 2012. Its terms of reference that it's been operating under were rewritten in 2014. On a number of occasions, this committee and the RPC said it was happy to abide by the recommendations of that process. 2016, you overhauled the entire process when you came on board. So can you explain to us, why is this issue coming to us for resolution today so late in the triennium? Why is that happening?
Well, certainly when the tank group signed off on their recommended draft plan change, albeit with some areas of lack of consensus that needed to be worked through by the Regional Planning Committee this time last year, we had anticipated that we would certainly be notified by certainly the middle of this year, 2019. And our advice to the Water Conservation and Order Special Tribunal, and in a number of communications publicly, have been that that was the sort of timetable that we were working off. What we had not anticipated was the difficulty in working through the content of the plan change with the Regional Planning Committee through this year. The number of meetings that were abandoned because of lack of quorum or the inability to get decisions out of that committee. And so it has dragged on this year much longer, certainly than staff had anticipated. So we certainly saw it as entirely appropriate that this plan change be considered, adopted and notified by this council within this triennium. And so it's here today simply because we did finally manage to get a resolution from the Regional Planning Committee to recommend to this council that it adopt the plan change. But the plan change planning track for that to go down was not resolved by the committee. And so, again, in the absence of a recommendation from the committee, it's ambiguous under the legislation as to whether this council can proceed. And so we've brought it here, noting the fact that there was not an agreement. and it's really for council today to decide what is, in its view, the most prudent course of action.
So it is not coming this late because the staff hasn't been prepared, the work hasn't been done, science hasn't been completed. It's been delayed because...
So I think the paper that outlined the different planning track options and made recommendations into that was presented to the committee no less than 3 and possibly 4 times this year, and was unable to be considered due to the committee either not having quorum or running out of time during its meetings to consider the matter. So, yeah, certainly it's not a delay on behalf of staff in terms of providing advice. We've been well ready to go with notifying this plan change for many months now.
And it would be fair to say, therefore, that would it not, that the councillors around the table are well educated on the issues involved?
I think that the plan, the Section 32 analysis, the various documents that support it have been provided to the Regional Planning Committee and therefore councillors around this table on numerous occasions, and there have been many months available for reading and understanding all of that content, and there have been many workshops as well. I think the comment that was made to me by the independent contractor that produced the Section 32 analysis of the tank plan change was that it was the most thorough and well-resourced plan change he had seen in his career.
Rick?
Just observing, Chair, we've been going now for just over 20 minutes, and you've had about 4 questions from councillors. That's it. Are we going to have a council discussion about this, or are we going to... I was just frustrated by the answer by James of a very simple question about making decisions on the eve of the council being, finishing. And we had a rehearsing of all various arguments of what the options were, backs and forwards for each plan. We're going to have a discussion about the issues.
Councillor, this is a really important thing that's happening here.
I understand
People
that.
need time to think about it and ask the questions. So you can just pause for a second and you can come on when you, because that wasn't a question.
No, I'm just
And
making the
I was
observation. You
specific.
pressed us on stop. I want the council to have a discussion.
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. Another question, Neil?
A question.
Yeah,
Mr.
question.
Chair.
Thank you.
I wonder whether the Chief Executive could finalise his position in regard to advice about proceeding to a fast-track option of referring the matter to the Minister. You've stated during some of your responses that on one hand it may be ill-advised to do so given the relationships, the state of the Triennium and the ongoing implications for an incoming council. Can you settle on your advice?
Look, I can to an extent, although there are matters which will require a political decision, essentially from council. But before I do, just to reiterate, I think, in response to the issue raised by Councillor Barker, at this stage of the Triennium, there is no bright line test in terms of those matters which the council should or should not make a decision. The question of whether it's inappropriate to make a decision right now, I think, rests heavily on the extent of public consultation and work leading up to this point, which is to say, to introduce a new matter at this stage of the Triennium of significance and to vote on it is highly problematic. If it's something the public wasn't aware of and it is essentially jumped upon the community. In this case, it has been a substantive body of work by this council over 3 years, was the point I was making, and therefore I think there is a strong case for arguing that this council is entitled to take a decision in relation to the tank plan change at this stage, close to the electoral period.
I disagree with that advice.
Thanks
I do.
As I say, there's no bright line test, and I think there's a strong argument to say that the council could. However, it is clear that there will be relationship challenges for the council with tangata whenua based on their strongly held view that the council should not embark on notifying this plan change in any other way than the Schedule 1 planning track. So to be clear on staff advice is that our preference is and has always been that the appropriate plan track for the tank plan change is the streamlined plan process. Give that advice though, absent of the more complex and ambiguous question of whether or not this council is entitled to do so in the absence of the Regional Planning Committee making a recommendation, which is to say our preference would have been that the Regional Planning Committee took staff advice and recommended to the council that the streamlined plan track be pursued. Now, in the absence of that, our advice would be that to maintain relationships with tangata whenua over this, either you take the Schedule 1 plan track today with all of the consequential resourcing implications for council and the delays to getting this plan notified, or you refer the matter back to the Regional Planning Committee in the next triennium and give the next triennium's council and committee an opportunity to further discuss the matter and see whether or not agreement could be reached.
Paul, you have a question?
Yeah, through you, Chair. You've mentioned a couple of times about the ambiguity around whether we can make this decision here without a recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee. Has independent advice been sought on that? Independent legal advice been sought on that?
So there has been verbal advice received. I don't know, Tom, whether you want to.
I've had a verbal discussion. I haven't directly sought advice, and I'd consulted with Petty Munro about the manner in which, if we were going to seek advice, we would. But again, I come back to the point that and you'll see that the recommendation here is that the staff recommendation is just to note that there is no recommendation of the Regional Planning Committee. We're not suggesting that you take the decision. So I didn't really feel like the staff had the mandate to go and specifically go and ask that question in the absence of a direction from council.
Rick?
Well, could I just re-ask Paul's question? I mean, I'm frustrated here because I'm just getting flannel. People are asking direct questions and I'm getting answers to a whole range of other things around it, and as if I'm being set up here. And I'm frustrated because the only people who can talk are staff, and councillors can't, which is irritating me, Chair. I'll just let you know that. Now, come back to Paul's question. Was advice sought, yes or no? And was it in writing or was it verbally? And what was the nature of that advice?
So, look, there's the verbal advice, as I understand it, that has been received, which has been a discussion with Simpson Grierson in the last week over this, has been that because it is ambiguous, you can argue it both ways, right? Which is what ambiguous effectively means. So on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. Now, we did receive written legal advice over 12 months ago at the time that commissioners were called for, and we had an issue around the Regional Planning Committee, and you might recall at that time a number of the PSGs, if not all of them, indicated they were no longer going to attend Regional Planning Committee meetings until this council had significantly improved its understanding of its obligations around tangata whenua. We then went into the mediated process, and the committee got itself back on track, at least with respect to considering the tank plan change. At that point in time, we were concerned that we might not have a Regional Planning Committee, and what would that mean for the council's planning work program. So legal advice was sought at that point in time. That legal advice, again, had effectively said that the legislation is silent on what the council can and cannot do, and you could argue that the council has responsibilities under the Resource Management Act, which it must discharge if it hasn't got a recommendation from the Regional Planning Committee. But on the other hand, you can also argue that the council needs to make all endeavours to try and get a resolution from the Regional Planning Committee, and at which point we have made best endeavours, or all endeavours, or all reasonable endeavours would be something which would have to be weighed by a judge. And in this case, certainly, I think you could argue that we've been round the houses with the Regional Planning Committee sufficiently on this. But I think the Regional Planning Committee tangata whenua reps would also argue that there hasn't been enough discussion, and that if the council does want to proceed, that it just needs to go down the Schedule 1 track, which keeps everybody's rights of litigation open.
Follow-up question?
Okay, then Fenton.
We've been round the roundhouse. That's. I just want to come back to the point here. Yes, it's true that you argue both sides. The court hears guilty, not guilty. You know, there's always contesting views. But within all this advice, and I've done this many, many times, you're not talking to a fool here, the lawyer will tell you that it's ambiguous, but their sense of the weight is here. So did you get that advice from them, that the weight tends to be on this side, although you could argue this?
So,
and if so, where was the weight in the argument?
the weight of the argument is that the regional plan, that council should take all reasonable endeavours to try and resolve the issue within the regional planning committee, and should only proceed over and above the wishes of the regional planning committee when it has a statutory requirement to do so. Now, the only statutory requirement we currently face to notify the tank plan change is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management's requirement that we have plans notified across the whole region by 2030. So we're a long way off having a statutory requirement. Now, you can then get into probably more fine-grained arguments that there are things happening within the tank catchments that necessitate some form of action. That is a much more difficult legal matter to pursue.
Another follow-up question.
We'll get to you, Fenton.
But given that you've said that all endeavours, or best endeavours, is the test, so with respect to the issue of the planning process, whether it's Schedule 1 or Part 5, is it your opinion that we have, as a council, as a planning committee, got to the point that we've used all endeavours, or best endeavours, to resolve the difference of opinion on this one issue?
I think we have had a clear indication from the tangata whenua representatives that their preference is resolutely to stick with the Schedule 1 track. I think on that basis that a judge is likely to view the prudent course of action for council is to go down the Schedule 1 track. A judge may direct us to have more discussion, but I have to say the nature of the discussions to date have been pretty definitive on the tangata whenua side, which is that there's no way they would consider a streamlined track, and that the Schedule 1 track is the only acceptable option. And because they've been clear about that, and because that is the normal planning track available to council, I would expect the judiciary to consider that as the default position the council will just have to take in the absence of having been able to convince the tangata whenua representatives of the Regional Planning Committee that we should fast track this plan change.
Come back to the question, is have we used all our endeavours, or best endeavours, bearing in mind that we have had one meeting which has substantively gone over the process, not 2 or 3. And I would have thought one meeting which you came to an impasse, not 2 or 3, was not best endeavours in my view. But you might have a different opinion. I'd like to hear that.
Well, look, I guess what I was suggesting then is that further discussions, in my view, unlikely to shift the position. However, you do note correctly that notwithstanding the fact that the paper was put up 3 or 4 times for deliberation and decision making, we actually didn't get to it, and it didn't have a decent debate until the meeting, I think, on the 29th. And so on that basis, you could certainly argue that it needs further discussion with the Regional Planning Committee and with the new council in the new triennium. I guess one of the frustrating things about that is there'll be a number of councillors on that committee who won't have been party to this over the last 3 years, and will have to start afresh in terms of their understanding of many of the issues here. But look, that's the nature of the triennial cycle. That's where we are at today, and so further discussion by the planning committee in the next triennium would certainly reduce the risk, the judicial risk to council, that it hadn't taken all reasonable steps.
Fenton, then you, Tom.
So we're talking about ambiguity here, Chair. put this plan change to one side, whatever happens today. So we went down a fast track approach, and it was successful. Say, the minister accepted it and away it went. What does the legislation say around plan changes going through the RPC, future plan changes, and what level of frustration could be exercised in the Act, if you like, by the RPC going forward? I mean, are there means that they could then slow down the rest of the region, because under their decision-making process, we have circumnavigated that and gone ahead, and actually, if we were successful, would we be opening ourselves up for basically grinding the rest of the region to a halt?
Well, I think it certainly is a risk, and I guess it goes to the questions by Councillor Belford earlier on about why this has taken so long. The committee at the moment is not as functional and as effective as it could be, and what we've recognised is that the terms of reference of the committee that has the 80% voting rule, and also the way the legislation is structured, means that unless there's a high degree of consensus around the planning committee's table, progress will be very, very slow. And so anything that we do which reduces that level of consensus is going to have implications, and we could easily find ourselves in a situation where because of the antagonism created by the council taking a unilateral step against the wishes of tangata whenua here, has an ongoing impact on their willingness to come to the party on a range of planning matters going forward. So I think that there is every prospect that a decision to go down the streamline track today will have ongoing consequences for that committee's effective conduct.
Thank you, Fiona. Tom.
If we put an application to the minister, he considers all the issues, makes a decision to accept or not accept, either way, he says yes or he says no. Do any parties have right of appeal over that, his call on that?
So any party could take a judicial review on whether he has followed the legislation. I have to say the legislation is not highly prescriptive, and there's probably quite strong openings, if you like, in the legislation for a judicial review over that, and I would expect him to be mindful of that. Look, I just perhaps add that if there was a will to take the streamlined track today, a de-risking initiative council could take is it could invite the Regional Planning Committee tangata whenua reps to make representations alongside council to the minister, setting out their concerns. So while I would expect that they would make submissions to the minister anyway, we could invite them to do so. So effectively the different views between council and the tangata whenua reps could be represented to the minister, and the minister could then be asked to weigh on those matters. That's a slight mitigation, but I don't think it would necessarily entirely reduce the antagonism that will arise.
But effectively, if you were to accept and that were to be challenged by tangata whenua, it would effectively be putting the issue as to what was our obligation under the Regional Planning Committee Act, would it not?
Well, so there are a couple of different angles they could take. So they could judicially review the minister's decision just strictly in terms of his decision-making process under the RMA, or they could also challenge the legality of the council's request to the minister, and the consistency with the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee Act 2015.
In which case we would be resolving once and for all what is the meaning of this legislation. I have suggested to the committee previously that we possibly seek a statutory declaration or the like from the courts in relation to some of these ambiguous matters to help clarify and create a little bit of jurisprudence around the interface between the Regional Planning Committee Act and the Council's broader responsibilities under the RMA. So that's a possibility, but it doesn't resolve our most immediate issue today, and that's something for the future.
Could I make a follow-up question? The Chief Executive's suggestion that we could invite the Tangata Whenua reps to write to the Minister setting out their views, should we write to the Minister asking for a Schedule 5, could they do that off their own bat anyway? And what do you think's the likelihood of them writing to the Minister should this council do a Schedule 5? Are they likely to write to the Minister expressing their views? 100% chance or no chance?
So, as I said, there's every probability that they would make submissions to the Minister. I think we would probably say 100%.
99.9.
So it's more around the way it's positioned to the Minister, and as I said, this isn't a silver bullet, but it might soften some of the impact if this is presented as a stalemate or an impasse that we have reached and that we are seeking some ministerial guidance in this regard. So that's a way of presenting it, if you like.
Yeah, okay. One more question, or is it?
No, that's right.
Okay, I think, councillors, we are ready to move on, and our options are we either accept 2, which is kind of a nothingness, or we come up with some resolutions of our own how we move forward. So,
Mr. Chairman, I have a resolution I'd like to...
Tom, I'd like to accept yours. What is it?
It's basically it is it's lengthy. It's been prepared to be put on the screen here because it has references to a lot of implementation aspects of it, but the bottom line of it is...
Do you have a seconder?
I haven't indicated what it is yet.
No, I know.
So my seconder wouldn't know whether he... and so the bottom line of it is simply that we do proceed to submit an application to the Minister for the Environment.
And do you have a seconder?
There's a lot of other language that explains how that works.
You're going to talk to that, but that is the basis of your resolution.
That's
and do you have a seconder?
I'm happy to second pro forma, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Neil.
Under what process are you?
It's an amendment to the... So
So it would be a substitute for number
number
2.
Well, it's an alternate recommendation.
An alternate recommendation, yeah.
So, Chair, have you put the substantive recommendation yet, which is...
We have, do we take a vote on the substantive exception for 2? We haven't.
So, understanding orders, I would expect... No, number 2, I don't think anyone's moved 2 yet.
No, nobody's moved 2.
So we need to move 2 first, and then someone...
No, you don't. You can move a recommendation.
Ahead of...
Can we move a recommendation? We can.
Going to be an amendment.
Choose a noting recommendation.
Yeah.
A member is entitled to move a recommendation.
I thought we had done
We've done everything else but 2.
everything. We're just now waiting for a second resolution. It's not part of, it's a separate resolution. And Tom has foreshadowed a resolution. I'm happy to foreshadow an alternative resolution.
Well, we'll go through his one first.
My point is that both are amendments to the substantive recommendations, which is the one on the paper.
No.
I'm disagreeing with you on
I
that.
disagree with that too.
I'm saying to you, we've already passed a resolution.
Yeah.
Done one.
Yep.
We're coming to the second resolution out of the same paper.
Okay.
Two
Yeah,
separate
Tom,
resolutions.
we're accepting your resolution. You have a seconder and you can speak to it. Stick it up on
Can
the
we
board.
have it up on the board?
Yeah, he's getting it up on the board.
Just the one,
And when this is up there, it's basically the gut of it is number 4. At least the way it looks on my piece of paper. Nope, that's not the right 4. Yes, so 4, as you see it on the screen, is the crux of the recommendation. And the rest of the language implements that, basically.
Basically, you're recommending that council go to the minister with the streamlined process for his
Yes, I am.
for his comment. Basically,
Yes.
that's it. Yeah.
So, if I can speak to that?
Yes.
This proposition was handed from the tank group to the Regional Planning Committee through us back in August of 2018. And the tank process itself began 6 years prior to that. It would be, I think, hard to argue that there's ever been a plan change that has had more scrutiny, more informed scrutiny by stakeholders throughout the community than this one by the time it reached the Regional Planning Committee in August of 2018. In fact, in the year preceding that, in the year up to August 18, there were 42 meetings between our staff and specifically with Maori representatives, consultants, advisors, work groups, et cetera. 42 meetings from February through to August 2018 to try to present these issues, interpret these issues to the RPC, which had taken the view that it basically wanted to go back to square one and be fully educated on everything involved. Then we get to August 2018. It's handed across formally to the RPC. Since then, we've had 12 formal RPC meetings or workshops, including suspended formal meetings where we did not have a quorum and continue to meet informally to discuss the issues involved. And then in the last 3 months of trying to come to closure on this issue, in July, August, and September, we've devoted 640 hours of planning staff time to trying to sort these issues out with our Maori compatriots on the Regional Planning Committee and their advisors. 640 hours of planning staff time. And the staff has tried numerous times to graciously suggest to us what would happen if we did in fact go on the so-called slow track. We would have more of the same. We'd have it for 6 years, and we would basically grind this council to a halt. In the latter stages of this process, we've been ping-ponged back and forth from an understanding that we had but 4 significant outstanding issues to being resolved, to being lectured that the entire process was essentially a hoax perpetrated by the regional council's institutional racists. And yet some at this table plead for more time to reach accommodation. Well, I say enough is enough. If this were a divorce hearing, we would have to walk away and say we've had irreconcilable differences and we have to put the matter in somebody else's hands to sort out for us. And that's where we are at this point. So I think it's time for us to acknowledge that despite our extensive and best efforts, we have difference with some of our compatriots that can only be resolved through the formal processes that hand this matter over to other authorities. And we have 2 pathways for that to happen, which we are all familiar with. At the same time, we need to acknowledge that there are other voices and interests in the community who invested heavily in time and resource to produce what they believe is a very positive contribution towards improving water management, water safety, quality, allocation for the Haratunga Plains via the comprehensive plan change that we in fact have accepted for notification. And they did this, they put that effort in on the pledge that this council made that we would take full heed of their recommendations. These other voices have just as much right to be heard as those we've listened to exclusively for the last 14 months. Exclusively for the last 14 months. The public would expect those other voices to be heard and be responded to, and the public interest demands that that happen. We have a procedure available to us that would make it happen, that would resolve the outstanding issues with dispatch, enabling the actual work of improving water quality and use on the Haratunga Plains to begin within 1 year, not 6. And to free the rest of our staff to do the other business that this council needs to accomplish. That is the reason why I'm making the motion I am to proceed now. We have a clear understanding of the issues. The councilors sitting around this table are clearly informed about these issues, clearly understand all the ramifications involved, and to step away from this at this point with the expectation, given what we have heard from our partners, quote unquote, in this process, that we are somehow magically going to produce a outcome that smooths over the core issues involved here is ridiculous. And we're just punting irresponsibly into the future if we don't accept this resolution, this motion.
Thank you, Tom. Neil, do you wish to...
Mr. Chairman, point of order really. What has this piece of paper got to do with that?
It's supposed to be...
It's just the recommendation.
This is the recommendation.
Huh?
It's a hard copy of what's
A hard
on the
copy.
screen.
Hard copy of that recommendation?
Correct.
Yeah.
Where is it? I can't see it.
On the second page, I think, Brian. Sorry, it's on the second page,
Second
starting
page.
one.
Starting at 1, yeah.
Starting at
One second page.
You're right, Alan.
Just Neil has a right. Do you want to hold or you want to
I'll reserve my right.
reserve your rights? Any other speakers? Rick?
I want to speak against Tom's resolution. This is one of the resolutions which I feel more strongly against than I have for quite a long time on a number of issues. Firstly, I think the resolution that Tom moved is preemptive. I think the resolution is procedurally wrong. I think the resolution is has all of the potential to damage significantly relationships, and it is an overreaction to the situation we're in. I think it's wrong on legal grounds. I think it's wrong on every ground. Firstly, I want to take issue with the advice of the Chief Executive on whether or not we should be making decisions like this at this time. This council has 3 people who have said they're leaving. The rest of us will be here at the will of the people. In actual fact, in terms of the electoral cycle, we are like 6 o'clock on Saturday evening on election day. All the votes are in the system that are going to be counted. Monday was the last time for them to be counted in the post. Tuesday, well, it's Wednesday. So the decision is made. The only thing that's going to happen now is a few people will turn up to council offices, which is like the difference between 6 o'clock on election day and 7 o'clock. The decision's made at 6 o'clock. Nothing can change. So we are in every effect a lame duck council. And in that situation, you should not make any decisions which are going to affect the incoming council. Very clear about that. And James is wrong. There is a bright line. It's 3 months. 3 months is the line. But it's not just about the decision. It's about the effect of that decision on the incoming regime. So if it is, it's a matter of judgment. So if it is of minor or almost no effect, well, you can make decisions. But if it is going to be a significant effect, then you should not make the decision. It's not a compulsion to. It's like a constitutional thing in the English style of it. It's what it is supposed. You make the right decision here. And I object, as I always have, to a lame duck organisation making decisions which will have the implications which we have to be carried by others. This is a decision which the implication we have to be carried by others, and I object to that. I objected to it strongly. We were on the eve of making a decision last time. There were 4 of us who objected to it strenuously then, and I expect them to also be objecting to this now. I'm totally opposed to this decision on that basis. I will not impose my will on others who will have to carry it out for them. I think it's just wrong. The second thing is, it's unnecessary. The people who we're struggling with in the RPC are people who have voted 95% in favour of the plan. All we're disagreeing with is how we notify. And we've had one serious discussion, and we are therefore ready to have another one. I've been in discussions with Tanya about this, try and find a way forward. And her advice to me is that they don't agree with it going directly to the Minister, but they do believe that it's worthwhile having a further meeting, a further discussion. And they want to have advice, legal advice, on whether or not the pathway the default pathway is the Schedule 1, and the streamlined pathway is an option. But if you can't agree on that, you go back to Schedule 1. But also there's an issue about whose right is it, who has the right to make the decision on the pathway. Is it the council or is it the RPC? These are 2 issues we need to resolve. And we should have legal advice on both of those and discuss them. The point I want to make is, James come to it, all endeavours or best endeavours, and I don't think we have used our best endeavours to resolve this issue yet. We've had one meeting, a dust-up, we've disagreed, and I think we have moral obligation to go back and have another discussion. So after this resolution of Tom's, if it's failed, I am going to move a motion to schedule a meeting as soon as we can with that advice and call the RPC as soon as we can after the election. Because the incoming council are the ones who are going to have to carry this. And we need to sit down and have a frank discussion about both issues, about is it Schedule 1, Part 5, or is it who makes the decision on these things at the end of the day? Let's get this thing cleared up. And in doing so, we will develop and strengthen our relationship. I think that's the most important thing here. And I know that there's a frustration. We want to get on with a notification plan. The frustrating thing about this, we all agree that the plan needs to go out for consultation. We all agree with the outcomes. There's no disagreement about that, none whatsoever. But it's just the path we take to get there, that's all it is. And I think we're going to make ourselves a really difficult path if we are preemptive. Now let's take Tom's resolution. If we today write to the Minister, there's no doubt all the tangata whānau reps will write to the Minister. And I can say to you, Tom, your resolution will not be unanimous. I will vote against it. And so the Minister's going to get a resolution to proceed with Schedule 5, split council decision, and the tangata whānau reps all totally opposed to it. What's he going to do? Chances.
Point of order. As much as I enjoy listening to the member, I wonder whether we could come to a conclusion on his speech because I think he's out of time.
He's 5 minutes 46 seconds.
He's out of time.
But no, time is at the discretion of the chair.
And you're exerting your
standing
discretion.
orders, though, Chair.
So understanding orders at 5 minutes, but you're nearly finished, aren't you?
I'm nearly finished.
Are you finished?
No, nearly finished. So the point is, I just think the process that Tom has put forward, and I admire his, I agree with his passion for this and his determination to get things done. But the difficulty is, I cannot see that pathway ending happily. I just don't think the Minister will agree with it.
Thank you.
And I think it's better to regather our people and do an alternative pathway.
Mr Chairman,
Thank
for
you, that was 6
clarification,
minutes.
could Councillor Barker restate his proposed alternative motion?
I
couldn't hear it
Let's
properly.
not do that.
No, I think we've got to go through this process first and then
See
we'll
what
come back to him.
happens.
Are there any other speakers before we come back to Neil? Paul?
Yeah, thank
You
you.
have to go 6 minutes, Paul? This
No,
one?
I don't have to go 6
Thank
minutes. I think Councillor Barker has given us a great Churchwillian speech again, which I agree with much of it, especially the fact that we are here in a position where council is essentially a lame duck council because, yeah, all the votes have been cast and whatnot, and that this decision, if it was to proceed, would cause heaps of grief in terms of the future of workings of the RPC. And I just don't think that we've had enough discussion around this particular point of how to proceed with the notification. We've only really had one discussion around that at Regional Planning Committee. There's no way, I mean, for Councillor Belford going on about how long it's taken to get to notification, we've got to notification, we've agreed to that. So that becomes irrelevant. The only thing that we haven't come to agreement on is how we're going to proceed with it. So I'm a little disappointed that he feels there is a need for a great rush when we can sit down. We should take the time to sit down with the RPC and try to come to some arrangement which is acceptable under the terms of reference. So therefore, I will be voting against this particular motion.
Thank you. Other speakers before we... Debbie or Alan, do you wish to speak on this? If not, I just want to say a few words too. I have enormous sympathy with your frustration, Tom, on this. I think we're all frustrated with the RPC, the 80% voting rule. There's a whole lot of things that are just fundamentally flawed in the RPC. That's the first thing. The second thing is we do not want, and it would be really silly to go down the long track because then the legislation which is before Parliament at the moment will circumvent that and we will be left in the wake of everybody else as we continue to squabble about how it's done. So I think right now that would be a little bit silly to go down the long track, and I think everybody needs to get their head around that. I just want to follow up with some of the things that Rick said. If we go down this fast track and we don't go back to the RPC, and I agree that we should have a special meeting of the RPC to try and thrash this out. If we don't do that, every single Māori organisation in Hawke's Bay, that is the treaty claimant groups, the iwi represented by Nikki, and all the Tai whenus will oppose us. And it will fail. And I think we'll have High Court action against us, and that will be successful. And we will just look really dumb. We will look like, and we will be demonised, once this, all the different angles are played out, and you know how Toro will play out the different angles, we will look more than dumb. All sorts of other things will be cast upon us. So it will fail. And the consequences of failure are just not worth going down that track. So I do think we do need to thrash this out, and I think that Rick has had some really good conversations with the Deputy Chair of the Te Whenua side of the committee, and I think there is accommodation. I mean, there's a thought we could all go to the Minister and say, look, we can't resolve this, can you help us through this? Because I'm not suggesting it's going to get resolved, because I will oppose going down the slow track, because I think that is just dumb at this point of time with the government legislation. So, and other stakeholders will oppose us too. You've got to remember that it's not just Te Whenua, Forest and Bird will oppose us as well, and probably Fish and Game. So I just think we need to just settle down, and given the triennium issue, the issue that we're going to have a new council, we can sit down and we can talk this through and we can get it, because go back to, we do have a plan change. 95% with one abstention voted for the plan change. So we have general agreement on the plan change. It's just the way we enact it. And we have mitigating circumstances like the government legislation. So I think we just need to take a big breath, pause, and I'm pretty certain before Christmas we can resolve this. So I will be voting against you, Tom, on this. So Neil, it's your turn.
Yeah, well,
And
thanks.
then back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've been significantly attracted to this recommendation in the view that we do need a game changer. We do need a third party to come in and resolve the long-standing and intractable issues that have faced the RPC and this council since its inception, really. So it's a very attractive proposition to now seek that alternative view and some guidance on it in a legislative sense. However, it dawned upon me in the last day or two, having pondered this proposition, that in fact we won't end up in a position that will have it resolved for us. The third party will simply refer back to us, and in so doing, we will have really affected the relationship going forward. So I'm really in a position of not being able to support the resolution for that reason. I am attracted to other options, though, and the Chief Executive referred to those, and that's around seeking a court declaration in that regard as to the RPC Act itself. I think that's an inevitable course of action that will in fact get us there. So, and I agree that we would be imposing a burden on the incoming council for not only this coming triennium, but probably for the next couple of triennium if we go down this road in regard to the RPC relationship. So on balance, I'm seeing the problems. It won't get us over the line. I'm not as convinced as the chair is that in fact we have received a 95% endorsement of the plan. That was the vote in the day, but it's very clear that subsequent to that earlier RPC decision, the RPC, the Tangata Whenua members, have no intention of retaining if you like, keeping faith with that decision. It was always their intention to challenge that, and the Schedule 1 provides that opportunity to challenge legally. I think they will do so in any event. So it deepens, in my view, the need to have some third-party decision as to where the council stands with the RPC. Unfortunately, I think we're in a stalemate position, and it's up for the next council to resolve with the RPC over. So I unfortunately cannot support this current resolution, but certainly endorse the sentiment.
Tom, back to you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you referred to this one alternative being dumb. I think what is dumb is allowing a very limited minority to exercise a veto over a progression of a plan that would benefit the community and that has very wide community support and addresses issues that the community thinks we are addressing. Water safety, water quality, water allocation, and so forth. But no, we're not addressing it. We're in a interminable dance with a point of view that intends to use this basically as a test case. As Neil has said, there's no question that whatever the procedure that goes forward, this plan is going to be challenged by the Maori community, who have made very clear, right up to our last discussions of this, that they regard it as fundamentally flawed. If we were on a trajectory where it looked like we were ameliorating the situation, where we were in fact coming closer together in terms of both the reaction to this plan and the functionality of this committee, I might have a different view of the matter. But I think that it's pure fantasy to think that Rick having a few chats with Tanya is going to fix what is a fundamentally flawed process. And we're being asked to make decisions about the public interest here under rules of engagement that the Parliament would never give itself. Never give itself. And so we are stymieing our ability to address our core mission by being handcuffed. And that is unacceptable to me, and I am all for forcing this issue as rapidly as we possibly can, because we have to get over this. We have to come up with a process for the future that does allow us to make decisions in a forthright manner that respects all parties' views on the matters. We have to get on with that. We have to get to that point as quickly as we can, and my resolution, frankly, aims to push us in that direction.
Thank you, Tom. Take a vote, but we've got one councillor left the room.
She's had a bit of a coughing fit. I'm sure she'll be back.
I think we'd probably
Put it, Chief.
Put it. Yeah, I think we've got to put it. Okay, all those in favour of the resolution? Against?
Could I have a recorded vote, please?
A recorded vote. All those in favour?
Well, you can't constitutionally do that.
Why not?
You only call a full division when you've lost.
He has lost.
So are you afraid to be put on the record, councillor?
Don't address me as having no courage. Let me tell you that.
Rick, settle down. Tom,
I'm not going to have that.
we've called for division.
I'm
Tom's
happy to
called
have
for
my name
division.
recorded 10 times being against.
Settle down, everyone. Tom voted for, against. If you can please record those names that are against. Okay, so we're left with this. Do we have another recommendation?
I'm happy to move.
Oh, we do. Thank you. Rick?
I'll move that the Chief Executive convene as early as practical a meeting of the RPC, which purpose is to receive advice, legal advice, on the pathways, either Part 1 or Part 5, and secondly, whether or not, where the decision-making process falls, for the pathways of plans? Does it rest with the RPC or does it rest with the council? And that the meeting is to determine the pathway for the plans referral to the community.
Thank you, Rick.
Happy to second,
Do you
Chair.
have a seconder for that? Rick, do you wish to speak?
No.
You've spoken
Said all.
enough. Paul, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I'm becoming frustrated when we talk about we're having trouble reaching a decision through the RPC, and it seems to me that we are only looking at one side of the story in terms of we are continually blaming tangata whenua for being the ones that are causing the delay, when it's actually both parties that are causing the delay equally. And I think that point needs to be made.
Mr Chair.
Thank you. Neil,
Yeah, we hear this nonsensical argument defying logic. The staff and council have made strenuous, long-standing efforts to accommodate and get this over the line. So I don't accept what Councillor Bailey said for one moment. What I'm concerned about, Mr Chair, is the issue around preempting an incoming council. After all, we're at 6 o'clock on a Saturday, and what we're doing is preempting what an incoming council may or may not wish to do. I'm sure an incoming council will strategise this, determine the best course of action, and I would suggest this is an entirely preemptory recommendation or resolution of the council.
Any other speakers? Alan?
Yeah, Mr Chairman, I'm going to support this, but what I do want to say is that I'm absolutely convinced that in this country that organisations like the environmental NGOs and the RPC, who are unelected, who have no representation responsibilities to communities that may vote for them, and who have no fiduciary obligations, just hold far too much power in this country and hold us to ransom.
Thank you, Alan. Any other speakers? I just want to say just briefly, I think the second part of the resolution is very sensible, and just I actually do agree with Paul because it was 3 or 4 of us who used the 80% rule to oppose the slow track. So there is a fundamental difference of opinion between tangata whenua and councillors whether we go fast or slow, and that's just the way it is. There's a fundamental difference. The second part of Councillor Barker's resolution is that if we can't decide on that, what is the alternative? And the alternative may be that we jointly go to the Minister and say, we can't make a decision on this because of the 80% ruling, which is patently ridiculous and undemocratic. Therefore you have to, because I think somebody said, I think it might have been Fenton said, or Tom, that the government, or it was Tom, the government have delivered us an undemocratic process which they would never live with themselves. So they're going to have to, possibly, it may come back to them to sort this out. So I will be supporting this resolution. If there's no other speakers, Councillor Barker, do you want to?
Just to make a couple of things about the 80% rule. It's all very easy to blame the government for it, but I think Fenton will confirm this, that the rules for this were agreed between the tangata whenua reps and this council before it actually went to the government to confirm it. So this council signed off on it before it ever went through legislation. It would never have gone through legislation had it not been so. So this is self-inflicted. We agreed to it. So
Could you clarify who we and this council is?
the council itself, this council.
This council? No.
No, this council, I mean, in terms
This
of Derek's
council.
this council, whoever the council.
Just not us, Tom.
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, come on. You want a final one? Oh, that's it.
Yeah, just to say that, just to make the point that we have to try and work our way through this, and I just think that working our way through this slowly, piece by piece, is the best way. With respect to the point made by Councillor Dick, I can understand his frustration by these things, but Councillor Dick, If you recall, there was going to be a big dam put up at Manapuri. It was going to flood all of those Great Lakes. There was a small group of people who banded together, and they exercised enormous power, and in fact saved Lake Tiana as a beautiful place that it is. Without them, it would have been gone. So they haven't always been wrong, Alan. It's just one of those frustrations of democracy. We just have to live with it.
Okay,
I won't enter into
he's the last speaker.
I'll be here all day.
So, do we understand what we're voting on here?
Yes.
You put the motion.
Get on. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
We better
Have a
take.
decision on that, please.
No, hang on. There's 4 against, is it?
No.
Against?
He's called division.
But were you against?
I was for.
You were for. Okay.
For the motion?
The chair's, the division's been called for.
Yeah, for the motion. Thanks, Debbie. Against? It's passed. Oh, my neck. Okay. We're going to move to item 5. Does anyone want to break for a cup of tea and bring it back to the
Great
table?
idea.
Councillor Chairman, could you make a ruling as to whether we are lame duck or not? If we're lame duck, I just as soon go home. I mean, I don't understand why I can vote for the annual report or anything else on this agenda if I'm finding future.
Do you want me to make a ruling on
councillors-
whether this council's a lame duck?
Yeah.
It's definitely not a lame duck, so you can stay. We're going to have lunch at 12:30, I guess, are we? So we can get through all this. We can get through all this. 12, is it?
Well, as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think we should stay hanging here. Have a glass of water, guys, and we'll hang in here. Item 5, which is a pretty easy one. Do you want to just talk to it briefly, James? Or Jessica?
Where's Shush?
Shush is here.
Shush.
So this is Shush's paper, but this was in following up from last week's.
Yeah, Shush, you want to just come up to the front?
The last council meeting.
Is this your last meeting with us, or?
I don't know. Depends on when my successor will be appointed.
All right, we're never appointing them.
Yeah.
You'll have to stay.
Well, in that case, until I leave.
I'll let you talk to the paper if you'd like.
So it's just following on your last presentation, isn't it? Really?
It is.
Yeah.
The discussion is all agreed?
Yeah.
Chair,
Well, a question? Well, I think.
I'm happy to move.
Okay. Did we questions first? There's a question, Tom.
Item 17 in the paper, we had a discussion about whether ultimately there would be rules about de minimis commitments of funds out of this pot. I'm just worried that the legislative history here that's stated in 17, it says requiring that any decision to expend or reduce any portion of the capital base would require community engagement or a formal consultative process. And as I'm just worried that that phraseology, what's its legal standing? I mean, if we want to decide at some point that we only have to consult on expenditures of over $1 million or commitments of some, do we have that, the way the recommendation is stated?
It's very definitive.
It's not very clear on that point. It just says we're going to set this fund up, but it doesn't establish any ground rules, but it implies a ground rule here that I think is an inappropriate one.
If I can try to be helpful, the significance and engagement policy has a list of strategic assets, and by placing the entirety of the fund, including the inflation adjustment to retain its real value within the strategic asset definition within the Act, creates a definitive trigger for special consultation to touch it at all. It could be removed from that category by a resolution of council at any point in time. However, the significance tests within the Local Government Act still remain, and at that point any major changes to the use of that capital or departure from what was consulted on in the last in the special consultative procedure that led up to the creation of this capital fund still stand. which is to say that the significance and engagement policy is one element of it. If it was taken out of the strategic asset category, the council could probably nibble away at it, maybe, but you'd then get into consistency with what was consulted on previously, and you'd also have the normal decision-making tests which would require you to consider whether it was a matter that required special consultation.
So if we approve the recommendations as presented, and a year from now wanted to spend $500,000 to explore the viability of a plastics reprocessing plant in Hawke's Bay, would we have to publicly go through an entire public consultation process to spend the $500,000?
Correct.
Yep.
Is that why? Is that what we really want to do?
Yes.
Well, I mean, this obviously doesn't apply to the significant portion of other financial assets the council holds by dint of the sale of the future rentals on the leasehold land, and the council also has plenty of
Other money.
headroom borrowing. So certainly staff view as this doesn't reduce our flexibility to entertain other investment opportunities in the future. This is just about ring fencing those proceeds from the Napier Port IPO.
Question, could you consider
Oh,
this?
wait a minute. Here's hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Why, and we're sort of belts and bracing this thing now, but when we consulted, why wasn't this part of the consideration? Is it because we realised more than what we estimated, or what?
No, we
I
did.
can't see why this would ever have been insignificant, and therefore not requiring consultation of any sort to do anything with it.
Well,
I'm
that's-
not sure what we're doing here,
Well, we're putting belts and braces on it, essentially.
which could be overturned with the next council in one decision.
Well, it could have, though. It goes back to the point you were just making, that we consulted on a particular basis, and to depart from that would be highly risky for the council to do so without additional consultation.
I'd put more weight on that than a
Yep.
lame duck decision made today.
Well, the significance and engagement policy does have a schedule of strategic assets, and laying these funds into that category does elevate them in terms of the policy.
We're on that
And it
lame
does
duck slippery
clearly
slope.
indicate to the community that we have parked these funds and we have recognised so in our policy. And as we previously discussed on this is rounding out the process which this council has been on. It's consistent with what we consulted on, and so all we're really doing is tidying up things.
I agree with that.
I disagree.
Do we have a mover?
In the future council.
Do we have a mover?
Yeah, Chair, with an additional 2.2, that the future balance sheets of HBRC and HBRIC show the Napier Port Future Investment Fund as a separate line item.
That's fine.
That's a good idea. That's
Just
a
to
good
make it clear
idea.
to the public that
I
it's...
second.
Yeah.
I was the second, I'm happy to accept.
Yeah. You were the mover, so you'll have to accept that.
Yeah.
I just have a question though.
Yes?
James, we put our forestry assets into the strategic assets, we listed them, and I'm wondering if you can point out where they are.
Sorry, when you say where they are,
You said there was a schedule of strategic assets listed, and I specifically remember the forestry assets being put in, but I just can't find where it is.
I don't have a copy of the policy in front of me, so, Shash, have you got that? Oh, you have?
It's in our,
Sorry.
is it in our paper here?
Do you know which one of these are?
Look, I don't recall that, Debbie. It may well be the case. We'll need to go back and check. This is the current version of the significance engagement policy, and you're right that the forestry assets are not in there.
Oh, and it was specifically done.
Do you know when that was done?
We would have been looking at it around the annual plan time, wouldn't we?
I don't recall that.
Year or this year?
I actually don't know where they are strategic, are they? No.
But-
Forestry assets.
Well, the forestry assets, the ones with Tangoia, ring-fenced, we can't do anything. We hold them on behalf of a trust.
Of the Crown, yeah.
There's no way we can do anything with them other than what they've done for us. So, I mean, that could be part of the answer to Debbie's question. I'm not sure what other forestry assets we're trying to have.
No, I just remember the discussion coming up.
That it should be listed
Well,
as
it was
a
agreed.
strategic asset.
Yes, it was agreed.
Well, if it
But
was
I can't
agreed,
remember
then
when.
let's have a look
Look,
at that.
we'll go back and see if we can
Thank
find
you.
it.
Do we have a mover for this paper?
I agree with that.
A mover, seconder. Do you want to speak any more?
Oh, I haven't spoken yet. Just want to say that I agree with this, and the Chief Executive's characterisation of this is a tidy up. The only thing I felt with the paper, which was lacking, is that it mentions in the 30s about the requirement of decision making, etc., consultative process. All that. What it doesn't mention, I thought was a really important point, is that this is what we consulted on. We made this very clear about this when we went through the consultation process, and we are simply doing what we said we would do. I don't think the paper quite makes that as clear as it could have done.
The public, this is big in the eyes of the public.
It's completely consistent with the public, so we are doing what we said we would do.
Yeah.
And the way it's written here is not consistent with the existing policy or plan. Well, that's fair enough, but the truth of it is, this is doing what we said we would do. So I think that's the only thing missing. I'm happy to support the motion.
Paul, do you wish to speak?
No, I'm really pleased that we have got something out in the public now, because we did promise that it would happen, and I'm satisfied that this is a reasonable outcome.
Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Mr. Chairman, with apologies earlier on, I think you mentioned Councillor Bevan, but did we include Mr. Mohi?
No, we didn't.
And he,
You're right.
he definitely
He
did
did put his
apologise. So
apologies
can
Oh,
we
he
please
did. He said he was off somewhere.
Well,
correct the
spot it out.
record on that?
Thank you,
Yeah,
Al.
put that, thanks. So, I think that was passed. Fenton voted against. I think it was passed. That is passed then. Thank you very much. Item 6,
Thank you, Mr.
appointment to
Chairperson.
the hearing panel, sorry.
But just a question of process. Can I move a motion that this lay on the table until this decision has been through the hearings committee? This paper needs to lay, because it hasn't been through the hearings committee.
I agree. I understand that this case. I was surprised to see this here.
There were names here, but yeah.
Procedural motion.
Sorry?
Yep, look, you can put a procedural motion forward.
I
and
second
if
this
he's got a
procedural
second,
motion.
so-
Okay, we have a procedural motion, but it hasn't gone through the correct process. Any other speakers on that?
No.
Paper is laying on the table. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No,
No. Fenton wants to get on with life.
you need to get on with this consent.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree with that. Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, so no hearing
Won't
this
do
year.
anything till next year now.
No, the hearing will be deferred now, Mr. Chairman.
The question is, why wasn't it sent to the hearings panel?
Hearings committee.
Hearings committee, there was no hearings committee scheduled.
But the hearings committees are not scheduled, they're arranged ad hoc.
There was no hearings
attempt
committee
made
chairman in town.
When did you attempt to set up?
Hey, we don't have any negotiation on this because we've passed it.
We just
We've
need to
done.
fix it. Can we do it first thing as soon as, except Fenton's point, it needs to be done. So as soon as we have a new council, get the thing sorted.
Okay, so we have item 7, information and performance monitoring. The annual report. We don't.
So, look,
Not a decision item.
No, it's not a decision item, but it is an information, big time.
and happy to answer questions and take any feedback. And look, Jess will speak to it just shortly in terms of the working draft that it is and the continuing modifications. Look, I just, and we'll cover this off next week, but really just wanted to note the fact that it is unfortunate we weren't able to have it ready for adoption today. It's been a challenging process, which you've been appraised of with respect to the Napier Port issues, but also just with internal staff changes and also some staffing issues at Audit New Zealand as well. So between both sides, it's been very challenging to get the work done. The full report is with audit, and they just have not been able to provide us with their audit opinion as of today, which is really the only reason, or the principal reason that we can't sign it off today. So we'll be getting out to you tomorrow an updated version for decisions next week.
Questions?
Chair, I'll move the recommendation that we receive a report.
You got a question first?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Well, we'll just wait for the question.
Just a very brief one.
You got a question, Debbie?
Page 185 of the H. Annual statement. Annual report. There is a item there under current assets, under trade and other receivables, where this figure of 2.6 mil is receivables. I'm still surprised what would that figure be made up of, because we don't have, HBrook's not a trading entity, so how come they've got trade receivables?
Possibly could be the treatment of the transaction costs between Napier Port and HBrook this is at 30 June, so there were costs that were incurred sitting on HBrook's balance sheet that Napier Port were effectively going to expense. So I would imagine
I'm sure that's
what
what
they are,
it
but I'll
is.
come back to you with a definitive
We're
answer.
not trading, Paul.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Thank you, Jesse.
Any other questions? Debbie, you had a question?
I
And
do.
Alan? Yes?
Page 158, and if this is true and correct, then I'm looking forward to all the money that I might.
Yes,
we've
I was
already
going to
spotted
make some
that.
comments and apologise for some of the errors in the
Thank you. Any time will be great.
elected members when
thought
the
you
table
would say
needs
that,
to be
didn't you?
replaced, so there are some issues with that table. So apologies, and there are also some formatting errors.
Nice pickup though,
which will
Debbie.
be fixed up in the version that you receive tomorrow.
Rick's remuneration's incorrect too.
And Rex's.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
sure
That
what's
whole
happened
table's
there.
got
that will be
problems on it.
replaced.
I checked it, was it?
Checks in the post.
Says you were
Alan?
paid less than
Yeah,
you were.
Mr Chairman, in terms of this
But it's probably true.
meeting on the
I went
16th,
for the upper.
Yeah.
in
Good,
terms
Paul's
of this
got-
meeting on the 16th, is it quite clear that the council term ends when the official results of the election are
Declared.
published?
Declared. That's certainly the advice I've received, which is on the 17th. So the council is still constituted on the 16th. What we are suggesting is that if enough of local councillors can attend for us to have quorum, then that would enable both Debbie and Fenton to phone in. Although I'm not sure you're available,
No,
Debbie.
I'm not available.
You're not available. We'll enable Fenton to phone in if you wish, to save you coming down.
Technologically challenged, that would be,
That's on the 16th.
You're welcome to
be
join
too
us.
much. I'll be here, actually. I've got
Right.
another meeting down.
Okay.
Can you get an indication of who will be available one way or
Well, an
another?
indication today would be helpful if we could just ensure that we have quorum.
I'll be available.
And Peter said he's actually back.
Peter's back,
From
yeah.
Japan, so.
It'll be a quick meeting, hopefully.
Okay. So we have the annual report.
No other questions?
No other questions? Receiving and considering. Right, do we have a mover? Thank you, Neil. Oh, you move forward. Seconder, Neil, do you speak? Paul? All those in favour? Aye. It is passed, thank you very much. Is that it, is it? That's it.
Two
Oh,
items
we
from-
have two items. We have two items for, and we're going to be early. The two items were, what were they, Rick?
Two minor
Plastic and Kahatua Nursery.
Just to say that I went to the plastic recycling plant in Wellington the other day, and they recycled the bottles. There's a lot of plastic they don't recycle, and they only recycle the bottles out of Hawke's Bay, which leaves quite a significant gap. So I just think it's an issue for, I think, this council to look at next year, although rubbish and trash is an issue for the TLAs, but it seems to me that it's an issue for the whole of Hawke's Bay, and it might be an issue too big for a council to deal with. So I'm happy to carry on looking at that. But really interesting what they do. I'm happy to talk to people about it later. The second thing is I had a meeting with Nikki Tracy about the Kahatia Nursery re-establishment at Hawke's Bay Prison. We have had a problem in trying to get the business case resolved. Tracy and I talked to the people in corrections. On behalf of council, I gave them some views about what I thought the council would be in for, about governance, about management, etc. And they're going to draft that up, and it will come back as a draft, which I will then consult with the executive team and council about, because part of it will have implications for cash, part of the implications about policy. But this needs to be done, because if we don't get this thing done quickly, it's going to slide over next year, and money and all sorts of other things disappear. So if I'm working to have us to be able to resolve this before the end of the year, and Tracy and I have now formed a reinvigorated team, and it's going to be a flying wedge. We're going to get this thing done. So We'll look forward to giving you a full report before the end of the year, and hopefully at the beginning of next year having a confirmed decision. So it's looking much better.
Thank you, Rick. So that's the end of our meeting, but
Move to go into public exclusion.
yes, we need to go into public excluded. Thank you, Paul, and Rick will second that, just to
Yes.
confirm those minutes. All those in favour of going to public excluded? Aye. So who do we have to boot out?
I've got to confirm the public excluded minutes, Chair.
No public here, really.